Thank you for watching the Alliance House Community Talk Show. As we've said before, we are an organization that's geared toward military veterans, their families, to help them get the support they need while they're suffering from severe brain injuries, PTSD, suicidal thoughts. We know that as a community, we can help and reach our veterans. As a community, we can impact and make a difference. As a community, we can make some changes to what's going on, whether or not it's with the legislations, with the VA and all those different outfits that are out there. As a community, we embody the support system that caters to our military veterans. We said it before and we'll say it time and time again. All gave some and some gave all. We've heard that. We hear it echoed through the halls of our military barracks, our military institutions. We hear it all the time. In addition, we know that families are impacted. Families are sometimes devastated from these experiences that the military man or woman goes through. And those experiences are catapulted to the children. We have another saying that we say, the war may be over, but the battle rages on, because it rages on continuously in their mind. We have a gentleman here who we'll be talking to momentarily. His name is Roy Hensley. He is an advocate for the deaf and hard of hearing community. He goes out, he reminds me of a military person who goes out tirelessly just supporting the community, doing whatever is needed to bring support, bring changes, bring opportunities to those who are suffering, to those who are who needs his help. And he does this without any reservation, without any hesitation. Mr. Roy Hensley would share his story about his brother and his father. He would share his story from a son's perspective, from a brother's perspective. Introducing you now, Mr. Roy Hensley. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Troy. Yes, as you noted in the introduction, I come from a military family. My family has 7 children, 5 boys and 2 girls. Okay. We grew up in a family with a father who served in the Navy for almost 30 years. And I had my oldest brother and my youngest brother both serve in the Air Force. I have had the opportunity to sit here and listen to a lot of stories. And when I look at, before I tell my story, when I look at just the name alone that you've chosen for this, I'm not even going to call it an organization, because this is not a program-driven cause, it's a people-driven cause. And you look at the word alliance, as it says up there, the Alliance House. If you look up the word alliance, there's several different names, but the one that I'm going to refer to that I've been able to gather from the stories that I've heard today so far is relationship. It's all about relationship. When you talk about my role in the agency that I personally run for Signs of Silence, it's an agency that provides resources to the deaf and the hard of hearing community. And I can probably sit here and throw out a bunch of statistics. I can give you a bunch of statistics on the deaf community related things, but when you refer to PTSD or brain injuries or all that stuff, I don't think it's as important really as throwing out a statistic as you look at the individual person, because when you talk about relationship, it's about the individual. When I grew up, again, I grew up in a military family. I was born in Texas. My dad, most of my life was gone. I don't really didn't have much of a relationship with him. Neither did my brothers and sisters, because he was on a ship or in a war somewhere. In fact, I just recently found a picture, going through some pictures in my personal photo album of my dad, pictured in a picture standing with the troops in front of Dwight D. Eisenhower at the end of World War II. That's when he started serving in the military. He also served in the Vietnam War and the Korean War and a number of others. And I just remember growing up, basically my mom raised 7 children as a single mother. And I remember when my dad retired in 1977, he had to retire, otherwise he would have stayed in longer because he was grazed by a hand grenade. And so he had a forced retirement. He had to get out of the military with an honorable discharge. And I remember when my dad came home, I remember many nights, my mother ended up having to sleep on the couch because my dad would wake up in the middle of the night screaming at the top of his lungs, just still asleep, but having a lot of nightmares. And we had a bedroom upstairs. It was a 2-story home. And I remember my mom, again, had to sleep on the couch many times because she was in fear for her life, because he would wake up with all these flashbacks. Back then, PTSD was probably known, but it wasn't as known as it is today. And so we as kids, every time my dad would come home from work every day, we would all leave. We would all leave the house, go play with our friends or something. When we would always come back home, maybe 9 or 10 o'clock at night, when we knew my dad was in bed, because we were just terrified being in the same house with him. So he suffered very severely with PTSD, and probably a number of other diagnoses. When I sat here, and my mom and dad ended up staying married. They ended up being married for 55 years. But when I listened to Becky's story, John's girlfriend, actually she embodies what the Alliance House is all about, because she believed in relationship. Aside from all the issues, she believed in relationship. And she embodies the whole name of the Alliance House. And my mother was the same way. We definitely need a lot more Beckys in this world. It wasn't until probably 40 years later that, working through issues and treatments and things like that, my dad was able to finally live functionally. Us kids were able finally to forgive him for a lot of the things that he did, because there ended up being a lot of physical abuse in the home. So it was just a very traumatic experience. And like you said, it doesn't stop with just the person who suffers with that diagnosis. It affects the entire family.
It does.
So when I look at, I'm going to add this, when I look at the word PTSD, which is not up here currently, there's a name. I mean, everybody understands what PTSD is, right? But I'm going to, as the Alliance House, and as, God always makes good things come out of bad things, let's take PTSD and make it a positive experience. And let's change it from whatever the acronym is to PTSD is a positive transition from suffering and determination. And let's run with that. Let's run with that. I also have an older brother who served in the Air Force. He had come home after serving a couple tours in the Air Force. When he came home, he ended up, San Diego County is where we live, and he ended up coming home. He was one that we didn't know that he suffered from PTSD. We really didn't. His was more hidden, which I think a lot of people live with, a hidden disease. And so with him, we had no idea what he had suffered with. And sometimes it takes a traumatic experience in a person's life in order to trigger a very negative response. And so one day my brother, growing up, being from a military family, we always had guns in the house. We used those guns quite often to go hunting, or out in the woods or the mountains or somewhere. And I remember that my brother used to keep a gun underneath the seat of his car. Back then, gun laws were a little bit different. And he had left work one day in Escondido, was driving home, and on his way home, he gets pulled over by a policeman. Policeman gets him out of his Jeep. My brother, totally unaware of what was going on or even the reason why he was even pulled over. The police ended up roughing him up, searched his Jeep, found the gun underneath, the seat of his car and took him directly to prison. That was a very triggering event for him. When he went to prison, he got released the next morning, which happened to be, I believe, my mom and dad's, well, no, it wasn't their anniversary, because he actually, well, I'll tell you that part of the story in just a second. It was the beginning of 1978. It was in March of 1978 when all this happened. And he got home the next morning from being in jail after they'd done their research, found out he was not a part of what caused the police to pull him over, which was a robbery at a liquor store. Mm-hmm. The person in the robbery, the suspect, drove a Jeep, much similar to my brother. So because he was driving a Jeep, thinking he's a possible suspect, they pulled him over, found the gun, tried to put two and two together, but realized later, of course, it wasn't him. And so from that event, the next morning, my brother got up in the morning. Me and my brothers went to school that day, as we normally did. We still lived at home. And he lived in a little trailer in the backyard. And because of that event, again, unbeknownst to anybody what was going on, he ended up getting drunk, wrote a suicide note, telling my mom and dad, "I love you very much," took the gun and committed suicide.
What we do at the Alliance House, Roy, is that when we say the war may be over, but the battle rages on, it's because it does, and because it's real. A lot of hospitals, they do a process where they believe in medicating psycho drugs. What they don't tell people is that some of the drugs or some of the medication side effects would be hallucination and suicidal thoughts. So you marry those two together, what do you get? You are on your road. You're on the road or on the path to something detrimental. It's like it's bound to happen, unless there's a detour, unless you're coming to a dead end, and the dead end's like, you know what? Here's the sign on the wall. Here's the Alliance House. Here's what we say. We say if you don't get help with us, get help somewhere. That's our thing, because we know that, we can be pompous, we can be cocky, and say, we can help everyone. We can say everyone.
There's a little more to the story.
Right.
Let me finish, because I think this part's going to be really important. Sorry for getting emotional, but
that's okay. It's understandable.
It's not the easiest thing being born and living in a military family. But one of the things that I remember at my brother's funeral, after the funeral, we're all lined up outside the church, right? People are coming by, and then people are crying and saying, the thing that they kept saying was, "I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. I wished I'd said something. I wished I'd done something for him while he was still alive." The Alliance House, which represents Becky, is a place that gives us an opportunity to pass out flowers while people are still alive, not when they're gone. That just really bugged me, and all the regrets that people had because they didn't take the time to tell them how much they loved them, they appreciated them, they could have done things for them while they were still alive. So I'm going to bring this home. We're going to end this conversation by bringing this home. When you talk about the Alliance House, it is a house, it is a home, it is a relationship. So let's take home and make that also an acronym by the meaning: honor our military every day. Home. Let's bring this home by supporting the Alliance House, by helping people find a resolution or a detour before it becomes a statistic, not after. Let's bring it home. Let's bring it back to the Alliance House.
Roy, what do one say? Being a vet, to have an outlet just to say, we love you and you matter. Thanks for coming on.
You're welcome.
Thanks to the Lions House. Thank you for watching.